Let's go live now to Washington and talk to Professor Michael Mann, a climatologist and geophysicist at Pennsylvania State University. Michael, thank you very much for your time. US, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they're the ones objecting. Why?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. We've seen this story before. A small number of bad actors who, in essence, are conspiring to prevent the implementation of an agreement where there's otherwise support among the rest of the world's nations. In this case, the conclusion that we need to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that requires substantial reductions in carbon emissions over the next 10 or 12 years. We have to bring them down by about 50% within the next 12 years if we are going to stabilize warming below that dangerous level of warming. And here you have the United States, of course, the Trump administration, which has been very cozy with fossil fuel interests. Trump had appointed the former CEO of ExxonMobil to be his Secretary of State, his first Secretary of State. So clearly fossil fuel interests are running the Trump administration. Saudi Arabia, of course, driven by fossil fuel interests, and then Russia, which has attempted a $500 billion deal with ExxonMobil to mine the remaining oil reserves in Russia. So you have three actors conspiring, some might say colluding, to basically get in the way of this very important agreement.
The IPCC report recommended some far-reaching changes, especially in the way that we use our energy. It was quite profound at the time. Isn't this the report hitting up against reality? There are a couple of countries here, like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, their entire economic model practically, arguably, is fossil fuels.
Yeah, but there are countries that have historically been fueled by the fossil fuel industry that recognize that there is a transition underway. We are leaving the age of fossil fuels, and those countries that get on board with the greatest economic revolution of this century, the renewable energy revolution, are the ones who are going to succeed going forward. So at this point, those countries have to decide if they're going to get on board with this transition, with this economic revolution, or if they're going to get left behind at the station. And unfortunately, a small number of countries, the Trump administration, of course, currently controlling US policy, Russia and Saudi Arabia, are instead focused on their own short-term financial interests at the expense of the larger interests of this planet.
Some might observe from this that making a difference is going to require unprecedented cooperation, global cooperation. If these countries fail to accept this report at the end of this climate talk, how can these countries even be held accountable? Can anything be done?
Well, the idea behind the Paris Accord was a so-called name and shame approach to exerting pressure on the various participating nations, which is to say, if you don't do your part, you'll be shunned by the world community. And that's the sort of pressure that now has to be brought to bear on the Trump administration, on Russia, and on Saudi Arabia, because they are attempting to conspire to spoil an agreement that is necessary for stabilizing warming below catastrophic levels.
All right, Professor Michael Mann, a climatologist and geophysicist.